Hey guys, welcome to my channel. This is Salman Harris, and today I'll be taking you through Google's Web Inspector, and this is going to be a tutorial series. I'm going to start with very basic stuff, and then eventually move towards more advanced topics like breakpoints, debugging, and gauging the performance of your application or the website. So in the beginning, I'll show you different ways to manipulate HTML and CSS. So let's get started. But before I go to that part, just let me show you how you can arrange your web inspector in different ways according to your likings. So in my case, I really like to keep my inspector on the side, but you can basically arrange it the way you want it. But before I go to that, let me just show you how to summon it, how to bring it in front. So this is a theme that I'm going to be demonstrating the web inspector on, and I'm going to link this theme in the description below where you can find it. So basically you can right click on the item and basically inspect it. Okay, so as you inspected it, it appeared on the side. And you can also click on this button here, and what it's going to do is going to show you the outline for the element and on hover, and as you click on it, it's going to be selected. So this is useful when you have a lot of different elements with very tight spacing and you want to find a specific element with the precise movement of the mouse. So I already showed you how to find the element. Now you can rearrange your web inspector according to your liking. So you can click on this three-dotted icon, and here you can arrange your dock sides. So for example, if you want it to be on the bottom, you can click here, or you can click on the right dock to left, and it's going to be on the left. I don't know who would arrange it like that. Honestly, I don't like it, but it's your choice. Also, if you have a tight space in your desktop, you can pop it out and keep it as a separate window, so it gives you a better real estate on working with your elements. I'll bring it back on the side. So let's just quickly go through what we can do with the HTML here. So in this panel, as you can see, I'm going to just expand it. So in this panel, you can manipulate the HTML in different ways. So let's say I want to just edit the text. So I can just right click on it and it will appear here. So let's say I want to say heading bigger. Okay. So as you can see on the HTML itself, it got changed. So you can do a bunch of different actions with the HTML here. So let's say I want to delete this node. So I can just select it and click delete or backspace, and it's going to delete that node itself. And good thing is that you can always bring it back by undo command, which is in the Mac command and Z. So it brought it back. Apart from that, let's go through the options that we get from here. So, okay, so if you want to add an attribute, you can either double click on it and start adding the attribute like normal HTML. So for example, I want to add an ID with, it's called heading 1, okay? So you can add your own custom attributes here. You can do the same thing by right clicking and doing the attributes here, like add attribute, edit attribute. And if you click on edit HTML, what it's going to do is going to open the HTML as a whole thing, and it's going to be a node. So let's say if I want to replace it with something else like p tag test. So as you can see, it got changed here. So I'll bring it back. I can undo it and it's bring it back. Now you can, these are a bunch of useful actions here in the copy menu. You can cut the elements, copy the element, but I find it the simpler way, which is you can right click on the element itself, and you can drag it and drop it where you want it. So in my case, I want it to be in the middle, so I just drop it in the middle so it appeared there. So this is pretty useful, and you can undo again. And let's go through these options here. So you can copy outer HTML. What's basically this is going to do is going to copy the HTML for that node, and you can paste it in your code editor afterwards and do with it what you want. Copy the selector. In this case, what it's going to do, it's going to copy the selector for the CSS to target. So I'll show you how it works. So I copied the selector. I'm going to open my code editor here. And since this element didn't had any specific ID or class, what inspector did was found a logical hierarchy of this element for it to be targeted. So this is quite useful because it gives you a specific element selector, and you can just paste it in your CSS and start styling your element. Let's go back, and then you can copy the JS file. It's the same thing as CSS, but for the JS instead, where you can copy the path in JS and start manipulating your HTML. And then you have copy styles, which copies the styles already applied to this node, and you can paste it in your code editor afterwards. Okay. Now force state. I'll go through these options later. Force state and the break on. Okay, let's move on. So expand recursively, as name suggests, is going to expand the node recursively and all the childs underneath it. If you do this for a node, let's say I'm going to do this for a node, expand it. Conversely, I can collapse the children as well. And then you have a scroll to view. Basically, if the view is not visible, let's say a view is outside of the viewport. Let's say I scroll here, and then right-click on the element and scroll to view. It's going to scroll that element into the viewport. Viewport is basically this part, which is visible right now in the screen. And yeah, there's one more option which I'm going to cover right now, which is store as a global variable. So what it does basically, it stores the node in a temporary variable inside the Google Inspector console environment itself. And you can store it and then work with it later on in JS. I'll show you this later in detail. So now we covered the HTML part. Let's move on to the CSS part. So let's start editing by, let me refresh the page so it's clean. So let's say I want to target this specific button. So I can right click and start inspecting. And as you can see, it already has a class. And this class is coming from Bootstrap. So in order to start modifying the properties, you can start adding them here. So for example, for this button secondary, I want to add a border. 2px solid red. Okay. So it added the border here. And the good thing about this is this editor is that it gives you code hinting with all the properties. So you don't even have to type it. You just select the property and you select the available options for it. For example, I don't know what it does. This one, the count increment. I just select this and then I select whatever the possible properties there is. This is really useful because if you're learning CSS, this could really help you and accelerate your learning process. And apart from that, Google Inspector has some of the good visual tools as well for the common properties. For example, let's say I want to add the background color. It already has the background color, so I'm going to disable this one. And I'm going to add a new one. And so it opened this visual inspector, visual color picker with predefined colors and also a color picker here. And you can basically play around with it. And even you can toggle the color picker and start picking the colors from the page itself. Note that it doesn't pick outside of the page. It's just visible in the page itself. So let's say I want to add this color. So now this is the ugliest button, but it demonstrates the purpose here. So I have a bunch of other options here as well. So add color, add box shadow. Box shadow is a fun one. So once you selected it, it's added here and you start adding your box shadow. So as you can see, I'm making this button more ugly, but yeah, it's fun to play around with, and it's a visual representation. You can play around with it. Okay, so I'm going to undo everything here. So now you can see here that there are more styles as well that are ordered, and they're ordered by the priority of the style. So for example, in the case of the button, the last class is taking a priority here, and then you have a button class. Let's say if I want to add a style to this specific element, so I can just select here and start adding the styles. So for example, I want to have margin 20 pixels from the top. Okay, so as you can see, it just applied here. And if you look at the HTML panel, it basically applied the styles as an inline. So you can even add it here and start editing from here. So for example, I want to add, it's a little bit harder to do it from here, but you can do it. So let's say I want to make it 30. And I press tab and it applied the 30 here as well. And one tip that I always like, which is you can select any number-based property value, and you can basically press up and down arrow on your keyboard, and it's going to increment or decrement that value. And if you want to make it faster, you can press the shift with up and down value, and it's going to increase the speed. This is useful when you're playing around with your HTML and CSS and you're not sure what should be the correct property. So this gives you a good tool to experiment with your properties. And you can go with very advanced here, which is you can apply animations, you can have pseudo elements. There's a bunch of cool things which I'll show you later for sure. But in this tutorial, I'm just introducing you to this tool. So let's say if I want to test the hover state on this element, okay? So Inspector provides this useful force state properties, which you can enable for a particular element. It's going to hover. It's going to display as hover. So let's do a couple of things. First, let's add a class. So adding a class, it can be done from this plus button here. Let's say I added the class for all the buttons with the button secondary class. And I can do hover. And I can do background red. Okay. So what this should do is, on hover, it should display the background. So let me do the hover without it. It works. But sometimes you need to apply the hover state even without hovering over. Let's assume that you have an overlay on top of this page for some reason, and it's a transparent overlay. So you won't be able to apply the hover state in that situation. So in that situation, it's nice to have this kind of force state property, which you can just press, and it's going to be applied there. So see how it applies here, and this is very useful. Also, it provides different values like visited, active. Visited is notoriously hard to debug, so it's pretty cool to have this. So okay, so we covered this now. Let's just so you can filter as well. You can filter your styles that you apply. So for example, I want to filter button, anything with the button, and it's going to just show me that. Okay, nothing is shown apart from that. So okay, so we covered that. I just want to briefly explain this part, the computed section, what it does. Basically, it's a visual representation of all the different spacing and dimensions that that element has. So in this case, this button has a width and height of this value, and the padding and the border and the margin itself. So this is useful when you're trying to determine what's the width and height of the current element. And you can do the same thing by on the HTML panel by hovering over the element, and it's going to give you the same representation there with the width and height. So this is pretty useful. So apart from that, in this section you will see all the values available for the CSS, but if you disable show all, it's going to show you all the values that are being applied right now, either by you or by the browser itself or by the library that you're using. In my case, I'm using Bootstrap, so it's applying all these properties. So yeah, that has been the beginner's tutorial. So yeah, I think we covered the most basic things in the Google Web Inspector. In next video, I'll be showing you how to debug and how to use the responsive tools that Google Web Inspector provides. And I'll be seeing you then. Thank you for watching.